that's a concern regardless of Common Core or not. The longitudinal data system has been in place years before Common Core was thought. So the data, how much data we should have, that's really a discussion that it's time that we have, and we should have had this years ago, 5 to 10 years ago, is how much data should the state have on individual students. This is an issue that we really need to talk about. And especially we have heightened concerns because of the NSA and some of the things the federal government is doing. What are we doing as a state legislature, to protect our individual students so the federal government doesn't have access to that so they can use it, you know, for whatever way they want. So I think that's a concern. It would be a concern if we didn't have one. The second issue is control of the curriculum. I can remember when I was a senior in high school, I learned all the years through school that the United Nations was a wonderful thing. Well, as a senior in high school, I got the John Birch Society to come in and talk to the government class about why the United Nations wasn't a great thing. But they got kicked out before I even had a chance to listen to them. And I thought about that, and I thought, so this is about openness of thought.
We still get kicked out.
Yeah, you still get kicked out. But, you know, control over the curriculum and what's being taught, that's been a concern for me for 160 years. I know I don't look that old. I'm glad you caught the joke. See if anybody's paying attention. But that's been a concern with public education for a long time. The other issue is testing. You know, and that debate's been going on for years and years. And the final issue is the testing data, the standards and the quality of the standards. And there again, this is an issue that's been going on a long time. So my concern, and what I'm trying to bring into this discussion, is if we simply do away with Common Core, we haven't dealt with the real issue. Because all those issues are still there.
Sure.
And that's where I'm coming from. So I've suggested 4 things. Do you want me to do those right now?
Yes.
Okay, you don't want to talk much anyway, do you?
Go.
Well, first thing is we need to facilitate the ability of parents to choose the curriculum they want for their children. What that looks like, if you want to know a little more detail, then
Local control.
yeah, it's a little bit more than local control. I'm saying the parents should have the right to start choosing the curriculum for their children.
That is local.
That is very local control, isn't it?
Yep.
The second thing, we need to have a robust discussion in the legislature and as citizens on what data we are collecting and what we should do with it. And I don't know the answer. I think, but we need to have that discussion. That's the second thing. And one of the logical things to do is to pass a law in the state legislature prohibiting the federal government from having access to individual student data.
That's right.
I think that's pretty, you know, Superintendent Luna agrees with that. I think that's something we can get done. But I think there's a bigger issue with data besides just that. The third thing, the curriculum, we want to make sure that the students in the public education system in Idaho know what math classes they need to take so they can support STEM careers. STEM careers are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And Common Core only supports through Algebra 2. We want to make sure that that's not a ceiling, it's just a floor. So students can take calculus and trigonometry and everything's in high school, so when they go to college, they don't have to spend a couple of years just taking math. Yes, sir?
I want to interrupt for a moment. How much federal dollars does Idaho take for education? What's the percentage? In other words, our taxes here, say 40%, 60% comes from the federal government. What is it?
Well, actually, in education, that's why education is such a nice issue for us to engage in versus Medicaid, which is 70% of the time. This is only about 12 to 15%, somewhere in there.
Yeah, we, of the $1.5 billion
much as we give them and not fight back, so we have to do some pushback here. And I
So
think-
if you pass a law like what you said, and the feds didn't like it, and they took away the 1/6, that's not gonna hurt our education in the state.
I don't think anything Senator Fain has brought up would put any of the money that we currently get from the feds at risk.
Thank you. I do try to come up with practical solutions that don't cause a lot of turmoil. Jim's laughing back there. You know that to be true, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the fourth issue, of course, there's several things on curriculum, but the fourth issue really is testing. We want to make sure that testing gives a greater weight to the correct answer rather than the process. The concern that I have there is that if you give more weight to the process and someone is educated in homeschooling or some other non-common core, and this may not be the right term, but that gives more weight to the process but they don't get the right answer, then it discriminates against those that are actually getting a classical education. So it could discriminate against homeschoolers and some others. So those are the four things that, areas that I think we can move forward, and with that, I'll turn it over to Superintendent.
Thanks, Chad.
Oh, yes.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Chad. Thanks, Senator. Senator Fain has for the short amount of time he's been in the legislature, he's passed more meaningful legislation on improving education than I think anybody that's currently there, and that says a lot. And I think as he's brought up some very common sense, realistic ideas with just tonight. And if you look and see the laws that he's passed, that they follow that same vein. So he's been very, very helpful. But I'm here primarily to answer your questions. I don't have a presentation. I think I'll just refer to some of this literature when it's relevant to a question that's being asked. And so maybe what I'll start with is finishing answering the question that you asked, sir. And that was about the federal dollars that we receive. As I said, Idaho receives about $215 million from the federal government. The majority of that focuses on students with disabilities, called IDEA funding, and students that are considered at risk or disadvantaged, and that would be, students based on their socioeconomic status. There's funding that comes to us for our child nutrition programs, right? Where lunches are subsidized, and we can have long talks about whether that's a proper role of government, but that is money that flows through the State Department directly to schools for free and reduced lunch programs. We do not receive any funding because we chose to adopt these standards. We would not lose any funding if we walked away from these core standards today. And so that's the amount of money we receive from the feds. It didn't increase because we adopted these standards. It's not going to decrease if we walk away from these standards. It's a voluntary choice. Granted, most states have chosen to participate, but Idaho does not receive any money because we've done this, and we would not lose any funding if we were to walk away. So that answer enough of your question?
Well, partially, but if there's no money involved, why do you, it's like I asked you before, what was wrong with the old?
Okay, yeah. So if there's not money, then why do it?
Right.
That's a fair question. And what I think you said is why don't we just keep the old standards? Well, I'm a results-oriented guy, and I think most of us are here too. We don't want to measure our education system based on inputs. Who spends the most? Who has the teachers that have certain education background, or all of those things may be important, but we want to look at results. And so let me tell you the results of the academic standards that we've had for the past 12 years. In Idaho today, with the academic standards that we have in place that students have to meet, we've had them for 12 years, as I said, 90% of our kids graduate from high school. So Idaho has one of the highest graduation graduation rates in the country. Of those, but here's where we can't just be satisfied with that result. Of those 90% of those kids that graduate from high school, less than half of them go on and pursue education after high school, right? And those that do go on, over 40% of them, almost half of them have to take remedial courses when they get there. So Idaho goes from one of the highest graduation rates in the country to one of the lowest in the percentages of students that go on and pursue education after high school. And of those that do go on, almost half of them have to take remedial courses when they get there, right? And 38% of them do not go on to their second year, and what we end up with in Idaho is about 35% of our adult population has some form of post-high school degree or certificate. Now, why is this important? It's important because today, 60% of the jobs require more than a high school diploma. Now they don't require a bachelor's degree, and they don't all even require an associate's degree, but they require more than a high school diploma. Some kind of professional technical certificate or completion, and then degrees and certificates above that. And so we know the results we get with our current standards, and they're not acceptable. And here's the latest evidence. Last year, at the end of our school year, when we measured students against our standards, 90% of the students in Idaho meet our reading standards, and almost 85% of the students in Idaho meet our math standards, right? Yet we know that half of those that choose to go on are going to need to take remediation when they get there. That tells me our standards aren't high enough. Our kids are meeting the standards, teachers are meeting the standards, but obviously the standards aren't high enough because when they go out into the real world, they're not ready when they get there. They're not ready for college, they're not ready for the workforce, evidenced by the fact that they have to take remedial courses. And so we need to raise our standards. And that's why, I guess the answer, what was wrong with the old standards? They weren't high enough and they weren't preparing our kids for the world that awaits them.
When you talk about the percentage that go on from high school to higher education, what time period are you looking at? How quickly do they have to go from high school to higher education to count?
It's within 2 years.
So if someone gets out of high school and they go on a mission trip, if they go get a job, they work.
That's all well, going and getting a job, then they're not factored into this. But going on a mission is factored in. The number of LDS kids, for example, that serve a 2-year mission, and now you're going to see a lot of them because they can go at age 18. So that's already factored into the percentages.
Okay.
But and also you said, and I just want to be clear, you mentioned going on to higher education. We're not just talking about. I don't believe that every kid needs to go to college, right? But what we do know in the world today, that they need more than a high school diploma, and it could be, like I said, a certificate of, in professional technical type trades, and that's what we're talking about. Probably.
Well, Tom and I chuffed around in education for years. So all those years ago, in the Clinton era, and it was all the reform committees, all of the goals 2000, all of the money we spent creating standards, why were they so insufficient if they aren't good enough? I mean, you saw how much work went into all of that, and if they were not adequate, why weren't they adequate? And what makes us think now we're trying to reinvent another wheel, that they will be adequate now?
Yeah.
And just a little PS on the math standards, when I was looking at one of the documents about how kids are supposed to think their way through it, we have literally turned math on its head. Math used to be about fast and efficient computation in your brain. If you're a mathematician, you are not a linguist. You usually have a strength and a weakness. And so we're turning mathematicians into linguists, and it's a long, drawn-out, laborious process, when in the old days we wanted efficiency.
So we probably should go to lunch and talk about the whole idea about whether some people are born with a math gene or not, because I don't think we agree that it's a genetic thing. What we do know,
Brain studies.
Well, I'll tell you what we know from studies, is that students learn math many different ways, and they primarily learn it 3 ways, but we only teach one way, so we shouldn't be surprised that by the time high school comes around, only the third of the kids are proficient in math. And so we have been going through the process of helping teachers know how to teach kids math in many different ways, because they learn it in many different ways. But I want to go back to your first question, because it was a good one, and that was about the standards we had previously. The standards we had previously, the first time we measured students against their standards, less than half of them met them, right? And now today, 90% of them meet the reading standards, and almost 85% of the math standards. So it has raised student level, but what we've learned is that the standards are not adequate for the world we live in today, and they need to raise. So we're not reinventing the wheel with standards, we're just increasing. Standards have always been the floor, we're just raising the floor. And we're saying we want students to learn how to do, perform at a higher level and at an earlier age. And when we,
No, I have a comment on that when you're done.
I was to say, when we compared these new standards to our old standards, in many cases, what we were teaching in 6th grade math, we need to start teaching in 4th grade math. I mean, that's the difference, and it's going to take a long time to get our students to perform it to this higher level. But we did it before, when we went from less than 50% of our kids meeting our standards in reading to now 90%. And it'll take time, but I'm convinced that our kids are just as capable and just as smart as any other kids in the world. And if other students are performing at these high levels, Idaho's kids can do the same. And they're going to have to if they want to compete.
One more.
How can you be raising the standards if you're dumbing them down when 4 times 3 equals 11?
So, I've read that, and there's not one standard. If you go look at the standards, and we've published them for more than 2 years, there's not one standard that says that the wrong answer is acceptable. I mean, it's just not there. And I've asked people to go find the standard that gives you heartburn, that troubles you the most, that you think is inferior. Nobody's yet come forward with one standard and said, this is the standard. But I think what you're asking goes back to what Steve's concern was, and that is that we put too much emphasis on the process and not the right answer. And I don't think you're going to find that when we give the assessment. But I will tell you that we are moving away from a multiple choice test where you show a kid a formula and then give them 4 choices and they pick the right answer. We are going to the kind of assessment that many teachers have given for years and years, and that's show your work, right? And when students show their work, they're going to use many different processes to get to the right answer. And of course, the first thing we're going to want to see is the right answer. But you may see a wrong answer, but you see when they went through their process, not our process, but their process, that maybe they transposed a number. So they had the right process, but they transposed a number, and so they may get partial credit when their work is examined. But they're not going to get more, we're not putting more emphasis on the process, but anytime that you do a show your work type of a test, then it's to examine whether students understand and can show a process. And I don't want to try to give too long of answers, but I think there's a great example on this of the difference between the test we had and the test that we're going to. Want me to finish and then I'll take it?
Yeah, go ahead and finish, please.
Okay, all right.
I'd like to put some of my perspective, because we're having a discussion here. I've read there's about 20 pages of first grade math standards. I've got about 10 pages of them. They need to be written in parent ease so you don't have to try to decipher what they're saying. But one thing that concerns me, because I do have some concerns about the standards themselves, and I think we should get into this as parents and get a little bit more, have a discussion about that. The word abstract when it comes to first grade math comes up quite a few times in those first 10 pages. An abstract and a first grader to me don't go together. When I go back to the 1880s and I look at the math books they had in the 1880s, you can look up Ray's arithmetic. They used examples from the students' lives for example, you have an apple and your brother gave you another apple. How many apples do you have? Now, if you'll notice it from that, you're using two concrete objects, apples. You're not using equals, plus, or minus, or anything like that. You're using common language. Because numbers for a child are abstract. For you, they're concrete. 5 means 5. But in raised arithmetic, 5 always was with an object. 5 birds in a tree. 3 flew away. How many birds were left? And plus and minus and equals are also abstract objects, abstract concepts. So raised arithmetic taught the teachers that you don't want to move to the abstract until the students start showing that they understand that 5 is a concrete. 5 means something in and of itself. So I'm a little bit concerned about the abstract reasoning of first graders, because my concern is confusion. Okay? And so one of the bill that I mentioned about parents being able to choose, have some input in the curriculum, the bill that I'm writing actually allows parents to choose any math curriculum they want for elementary school and for any government class, any curriculum for government class. So how that would work, people have some questions, but the point is, a lot of parents know more math than elementary school teachers do. And we shouldn't be separating the teachers, the students from their parents, if the parents actually understand mathematics. So I'm concerned about this relationship, and I want to make sure the parents, if they don't feel comfortable with what's going on, that they have an opportunity, if they need to, teach the math part of first and second or third grade to their children. They have that.
Let me tell you what I think one of the key elements of these standards is that students do not move on until they've mastered. So it's not necessarily grade specific, and what Steve described is where a student needs to be by a certain grade or age, but they're not going to move on to the abstract until they have mastered. And we don't have that in education today. Today, the constant is time, and the variable is learning. You will be in this class for this many weeks, and at the end of this many weeks, some of you will get an A, some will get a B, some will get a C, but you're all moving on. And what this flips is that the constant becomes mastery and the variable becomes time. You are going to master these skills and these abilities before you move on. Some of you will do it in a few weeks, some of you will take much longer, but whatever amount of time it is that you master these skills. And so if you look at this page, I think it speaks to what Steve was talking about. And it gives you examples of what if you look on this page here, it has this yellow spot here at the top, my left-hand side. You'll see that there's an example of a current 4th grade question and what a new 4th grade question is. And the 4th grade question strictly shows a kid a formula. Basically you're adding two fractions with like denominators, and it gives them a formula, and then they pick an answer, where the new question is more of what Steve was talking about. A student buys X number of sandwiches, one student eats a certain, a third, another student eats 4/5, another student. Anyways, read the question, you see at the end, they have to figure out how much sandwich is left, right? So it makes them not just memorize formulas and know how to work the formula, but how do you actually apply what you've learned? And where this really hits home to me is, if I've heard this once, I've heard it 1,000 times, these kids can't even make change. How many of you heard that or experienced that, right? Yeah. Let me tell you what I firmly believe. That student that can't make change, if you told them what is 500 minus 347, they would create a formula, and they would work that formula and tell you it's 153. 153. But if you told that same student, here's an item that costs $3.47, and here's a $5 bill, give me change, they don't know how to do it. They can work a formula, They know what 500 minus 347 is, but they don't know how to apply it. And this focuses on critical thinking and problem solving. That's what we're moving to, so students know how to apply what they've learned. Not just look at a formula, know how to work a formula, but they have no idea on how to use it. Yes, ma'am. Oh, right here and then here.
Well, I have a variety
No,
of
we're
questions.
gonna-
Yeah, Mr. Luna. Tell me, and I've taught Math Their Way, which I think is an excellent program. It was developed by a fantastic woman who died in San Francisco. And it was all hands-on for children, all the way up through probably 6th grade. But in any case, how does this Common Core, which I looked at the NEA website, I only have about a page that they provide, a skeleton, if anything, describing nothing down in concrete regarding what Common Core is. How does it compare with the various educational after-school things that parents have to pay for, like Kuman? How does Common Core rate when it comes to the fantastic, excellent homeschool programs all across America that homeschool parents are using to educate their children in their homes? And then, of course, I think the data proves that homeschool kids that go through, that complete their programs for high school are in great demand by top universities in our country. So have you looked into that, is what I'm wondering, because I brought you some stuff of the past. I'm bringing you the McGuffey eclectic reader. I copied a few of the pages just to give you what I believe was the best way that American children learned, along with Math Their Way. And of course it inscribes the Bible, which of course without the moral value basis, it's a challenge, and myself being an educator, K through 12, to discipline children. I mean, there were no bully issues because, of course, you're referencing constantly the golden rule. So I'm mixing things up now for you, but that is, I don't believe any American child is common, and I don't care for the fact that they're wanting to group us now. This program, I believe, came through this Obama administration. I didn't care for anything to do with the No Child Left Behind, which was a bunch of baloney. And so many families who really care, who didn't have the time to do homeschooling, had to send their children into these various educational after-school programs which cost a lot of money.
So your question is, how much
My
is
question
this
is,
gonna cost?
how much is how do you value this Common Core? Have you looked at what Kuman does and the other pay for knowledge programs that are available in this city as well as all over America? How does it contrast with the homeschool program?
Okay, well, I can tell you how it will impact homeschoolers in Idaho. And it will impact them as much as our current standards do, and that's very little. In Idaho, it's because homeschoolers do not have to register.
That's not the question.
Their curriculum does not have to be approved.
So the question is cost?
And that's the way it
No, it's not cost.
No, the standards.
It's the standards.
Well,
How is it
when we
compared to
discussed this
homeschooling
before you,
standards?
I think came in
It's
here.
it's not gonna affect homeschooling standards.
That's
in
not what she's
Idaho.
asking. She's asking, how does it compare? Like, we've
Yeah.
all asked, like, there's a big
The
question going
toughness of
around
the
that
program.
says this is an untested curriculum,
That's right.
untested standards.
It's
There's no
untested.
proof out there
Can I ask
that
you a
improves anything.
It's untested.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
I think there's legitimate concerns about the standards. Tom Luna, last week when we had our meeting and breakfast, he even suggested a way that we can participate in the years to come on comparing the standards, if they're good standards, rigorous enough standards or not. Every 5 years, every year there's different standards that are looked at. I think we need to get involved in that. But my question to you is, what does the success of your position look like?
The success of the homeschool program, I think, is bar none. I mean, across America, and I've lived in a variety of states in the last 6 years. Actually, this is my third state. and looking at the curriculum that the homeschool families are using, it's marvelous. And those children get through, and then they're able to.
I don't think we disagree.
Universities are in top. They are all. I mean.
And I would agree with you on that, because we homeschool our children, not all the way through. We did homeschool all of them some, and we used Abeka math, and we really liked it because it reviewed every day, it had something new every day, and it had story problems. And I really liked the math curriculum. And the studies show that that the homeschool kids actually do better. They're being recruited by top colleges.
Absolutely.
But
Right.
the question I ask you though, because I'm not debating if homeschooling is
Sure.
good or not. In fact, if we look at homeschooling, it really justifies my position to allow parents to choose the curriculum.
Right.
Because parents are pretty good at choosing the curriculum when they have the right to.
Yes.
If you remember, that's one of the suggestions that so I'm asking you again, what would you like to see change so we can have a solution? Because it's easy to point out problems.
I understand. I'm not pointing out problems. I'm making a comparison because I assume that the good superintendent here has probably explored the different for private schools here, for private, like the Kuman. And I can't think of, I didn't come prepared with that stuff. I brought other stuff to hand to you. Because I think.
So are you asking him to implement homeschooling curriculum in the public school system?
Absolutely, whatever's the best. Because American children are not common.
Right.
I don't go along with that. I have nothing to do with socialism. And I think being an educator, and I've well experienced all the grade levels.
That's what I was asking.
Yes,
What
yes, that it's his job to research the best and not to go along with whatever the NEA, because I am an individual who is totally against NEA. Yes.
Ma'am,
Yes.
I still have some open wounds because of my math battles with the NEA, and I will compare my fight against that organization to anybody in this room or anybody in this state. and I've gone toe to toe with them, and I suspect if they have a top 10 enemies list in the nation, I'm on it.
I'm sure I am too.
So I don't get, I have pretty
Yes.
thick skin. But after what myself and my family went through the last 2 years fighting the NEA to protect your right and everybody's right here to determine at a state level, a local level, what our educational system will look like, I don't think you've done your research to know my relationship with the NEAs, because it's
No, I
not
don't
a good
know
one.
it.
And so I'm not a dupe to the NEA
Okay.
or any teachers union or union boss. But what I will tell you, and now I apologize because I got a little wound up, but what I will tell you is that I believe that it's not my job to select the curriculum for local school districts, it's local school boards.
Then
They
why
choose
is it being shoved in everybody's face
Yeah,
then?
why is
No,
this common?
Why is it being mandated?
But Sir, Common Core is not a curriculum.
Yes, we're not saying curriculum, we're talking about the standards.
But we've had
We're talking
some-
about the end process,
I'll
what
tell-
they
I'll
have to
tell you-
shoot for.
I'll tell you why.
It's being shoved down their throat.
But we've had
That's not
standards-
local control.
Okay, we've had standards in Idaho for over a decade because we want to hold the $1.5 billion we spend. We want to see results for that money we spend. We're not going to judge our schools based on inputs, which we did for 30, 40 years. And so standards give us the ability to measure how our schools are doing. We have to have a standard to measure against.
Why these specific standards? Why can't you go with something that's less expensive, better proven, free?
Well,
Well,
Well, no, I want the answer. Why these specific standards?
This really has kind of to do with this, but, and I want to make people a little happy here. I voted for you the first time you ran. I was sorry you lost the very first time. And then I did speak with you on the phone after that, and you promised to go back to Washington and change the way the No Child Left Behind looked for special education. You did that, and we are very pleased that that happened because they were counting our son absent on the days they were testing. And then I went and testified before the Senate Education Committee because it was ridiculous. Now, so I appreciate what you've done very much. And then the other thing that I have a real problem with, and I can see the frustration with the Common Core. We homeschooled for a long time. I had to give it up because of the economy, couldn't afford to stay home anymore, so our son started in 8th grade last year, full-time, and now he's a freshman this year. So we're getting into the beginnings of the Common Core. And the concerns that I saw, number one, was when they actually had a meeting. I was lucky to know there was a meeting, and there were maybe 7 parents because there was no information. And I went back and looked at policy for the Boise School District, and the way this is coming in, they're missing some policy in there as far as informing the parents about what's coming. And I think the other concern, which is mine, and I'm willing to give this curriculum thing a benefit of the doubt because we did homeschool, so I used several different types of curriculum, is who's writing it. That's what my concern is, and how they can call something accelerated and then offer seminars if you can't keep up in the accelerated class. I don't get that thought process. And I asked that question several times of the teachers. Our son goes to West. There's some good teachers. The math teacher last year needs to go. And you know, that's my biggest concern. Who's writing the curriculum? What gives them, you know, how do we know that they actually have the appropriate background? That's where I'm wondering how this all came about, because there wasn't any information. Who's writing it? What's their credentials?
So can I?
That type of thing.
Start, you know, maybe give a little bit different perspective. You know, I think we can agree that most people in education and most parents are wanting the best for their kids, whatever the best might be. And remember when we started the discussion, we were talking about a lot of these problems have been going on for decades. And so sometimes when we say Common Core is the blame, you know, I hear this from the opponents of Common Core, thinking that this is somehow some magical boogeyman that's causing all these problems. And then I listen to some businessmen and educators that say Common Core is going to do all these wonderful things. And I say, everybody's delusional. Common Core is almost nothing. I mean, in the great scheme of things, it's the latest version of nationalized education. Now, so what I've been saying is we need to get into the standards themselves and have a legitimate discussion, because these are all good issues.
And that goes with who's writing it.
Well, and so
And how
let
can
me
you
go
have
through the
standards?
process of how the standards are adopted in Idaho. Okay, these are the Common Core standards. We're not going to change that for a year or two because this is just inertia.
No, wait a minute. In your answer to that, you're just addressing the state legislature had no input in this last year.
Well, we've never had input into standards. We okay. So we don't have, you know, legislature.
You never had any input in the Common Core, be it.
Well, we haven't had any input in any standard.
Who adopted this?
You know, I sit on the Senate Ed Committee. I've been on that,
And the
you know, for the previous 6 years on the House Ed Committee. And we've
And
never
currently
had any
there's
input
the
in any
education
standards.
committee in the
They really don't want us to
legislature
have much
that
input.
that sort of thing.
Because we kind of live in an expert-driven world. But the way, which I like too much, but the way that we
But
can
Steve,
move ahead.
Steve, I think your point, I think it's an important point, is we didn't nobody circumvented the process when these standards were adopted. This is the same process we've used for over a decade, right? And the legislature's input was equal to what it was before. The public hearings and public notices the same as it was before. And if people are saying going forward there needs to be more, there needs to be a different process, I'm not going to argue with that. But I think it's important for people to know that we didn't circumvent the process. This is the same one they were doing long before I came into office, and it was the same process used when we updated the standards to these core standards.
And that's fine. I mean, I'm not worried about that. That's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern is who's writing the curriculum
Well,
and
let's
what
get
their
into the
credentials are.
process. So moving ahead, because it's easy to raise concerns. Now, what do we do about it? Because I think that's a legitimate concern. I've heard that some of the people who wrote these standards really weren't educators and they
Yeah,
really
and
weren't in the classroom.
I don't even like the
But
word standards necessarily. I wanna know what they're teaching.
if you're a mechanic
How they're
and you have
teaching.
ASE standards, and you know, size of the bolt and thread and incline, you know, all that stuff, voluntary standards are great. We do the same thing in computer systems. We have certain standards. When standards become compulsory, and we don't have input into if we can, you know, so we can't back out of them, we have to join them, that's where it gets into trouble. And I think that's one of our concerns, is the federal government is absorbing more and more power. So we want to make sure we're pushing back against that. But let's talk about the process of adopting standards. Because every year, 20% of the standards are discussed. So next year, we're going to talk about, I'm not sure what standards are coming up next year, but I think we as citizens need to get involved. When it comes to some of the math standards, we need to compare Zev Werman's, is that his name? Guy from,
Yes.
okay, created the standards in California a few years ago.
Yes.
We need to take those standards, which are, and some international standards, and compare them to Common Core, and say, how do they match up?
He
Well,
said
I
they
think
don't,
we need to have the
they
discussion.
don't match at all, is what he said.
Okay, if they don't match at all, then we need to, every year we need to take a chunk of these standards and have this discussion. Well, all I'm saying is we're not gonna change the standards this year regardless of what the legislature does.
Where are they?
So
But
what
boy,
is my
where
son
are
gonna
they?
learn this year?
Right,
then?
why do our kids have to be a test
That's
project?
what I'm really concerned about, is my son's our
Well,
son is in ninth grade.
let's look at the
From now
physics
to
of it.
graduation, his grades count.
Yes, they do. Every year is important. In
And
fact, I
Boise
said,
State doesn't have a great
May I
rep for
speak
math.
here?
So,
6 years ago, I actually, the first year, 7 years ago, first year I ran for, you know, I was in office, I actually introduced a bill that allowed parents to request that their students receive the
What
math,
are the standards
can
for
learn
this
the
year?
math tables,
That's what I'm
memorize the
asking
math
for.
tables.
They're moving from.
Boy, did I catch hell for that.
And Drudge, you
Yeah.
recall.
Man, I don't.
Yeah.
I made our boys do that.
So what I said at the time is, we don't have time, I told Superintendent Luna this, we don't have time for this, the elementary teachers to catch up, to do math. We need to get the parents involved. That's still my position. I think it's a legitimate concern, but the way we make systematic changes, you can't, because you don't like something, the system is not going to change. The
Yeah, I
question
can't
is.
dislike or like anything right now because I don't know what's being offered.
So
Sir.
you want to know
Sir.
what your child is going
I
to be
wanna know.
taught this year?
Yes,
And-
I wanna know what curriculum are they using? What
So-
is he
so-
gonna
So
be
you can
taught?
start, but you can start by going to the department website, and you can find the standards and find your child's grade.
Right.
There's
I've
the
done that.
standards, and then go to your district and ask them which curriculum have they chosen to use, because the state does not dictate.
They don't answer that question,
No,
they
I
don't
was
know.
told-
Well, then you have, you elect your school board, I don't.
In the
And your
meeting?
school
Yeah,
board-
but what we're saying is you're pushing it down their throat,
No,
and they're like trying to figure out how to
The
comply
state-
with what you're
the state
shoving
has
down
a
their throat.
Constitutional authority and responsibility, it's in the state constitution to have a uniform.
Do you understand
thorough-
what I'm saying? I'm saying you guys are pushing this towards them. You gotta comply with this. And they're scrambling to figure out how to comply with what you're throwing at them.
We adopted these
That's
over 2
okay?
years ago.
That's all
We
good?
adopted these over 2 years ago.
Yes, you
And-
did, but
and-
it hasn't even, I didn't even know about it until 9 months ago.
Mr.
Obviously, the
Mayor?
people in this room
We got
didn't
Dan
either.
back there and Jim, and
Just
that's
one
it.
more final comment though.
We really
The
don't-
teacher that I talked
I
to
don't
said
think-
they're writing the curriculum.
Yeah,
Teachers at West said they are writing the
Well,
curriculum.
who do you want to write it?
We've got a very short amount of time.
That's not
We've
the
got 3
question.
questions left.
But districts have always written and done their own curriculum, and we're not infringing on that.
But they told us that it was different, gonna be completely different, completely rewritten. They didn't tell us who was writing it.
I would talk
Any
to
of
you,
that.
I would talk to your district because that's a local control issue.
Okay.
All the state does is the state distributes money for a thorough, uniform system, and then we say, this is what we expect the child to know and be able to do at the end of each grade. And then we measure against it. We let districts choose their own curriculum, they develop their own lesson plans, they select their own textbooks. They're a recommended list, they're not even obligated to
So
use
it's
those
not your
recommended lists.
responsibility.
What's that?
It's not your responsibility.
It's not my responsibility to choose the curriculum or the textbooks, that's local control, and I'm a former school board member, right? And I think, and I support those decisions will be made at the local level. I don't think the state should select the textbooks. I don't think we should select the curriculum. I think that's why you elect a local school board. And if they can't answer your questions, then you have the ability through the ballot box to make a change at the local level.
Yeah. Senator, superintendent.
Yeah.
Now we can have some fun, right?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, the core curriculum standards are copyrighted. You have to comply with 85%. That means that you have 15% you can put in. Oh, that's gotta be great. Superintendent.
Yes.
This is from your office. I have a son, 22 years old, just enrolled to CWI out here in Colvin. This is what they gave him to prove that he is an Idaho resident. Listen to this. This is for me and my wife. List the state in which your income tax returns filed for the last 2 years. Attach a copy. Do you lease or own a home? Attach a copy of the lease or deed. Yes.
Back up.
I want you to stand in my shoes right now.
Well, Tom, you cover higher ed.
Well, I'm on the state board.
This says right here, Idaho State Board of Education.
I'm on the state board. Are you looking at a form where you're trying to qualify for,
Yeah.
trying to qualify for financial?
They want to know everything about us.
That's a federal form.
Well, it says it's a state form here, Steve.
It's FAFSA, so it's a federal program.
That was so easy. I mean, I thought you guys had a direct connection with the FSA or the
FAFSA
CIA or
didn't ask us
the
that
FBI.
information.
Oh, I'm so disappointed you don't.
Give it back to us, we call.
FAFSA didn't ask for that.
We only have 8 minutes left and
There.
2 other people have questions.
Thank you. No, that was it. I
Okay.
had it.
All right, then, but he did ask a question about the 85%. I think that's a fair question. We've chosen to participate in standards that are common with other states because we want to be able to compare how our schools are doing with other schools in other states, and we did not have that ability before. All 50 states have set their own standards for many, many years. And what happens is you have a state that sets very high math standards, they measure their students against those standards, and they report that 70% of their kids are meeting their standards. Another state sets very low math standards, they measure their students against their low math standards, and they report that 85% of their students are meeting their standards. And the perception is that the state that is reporting 85% is doing better than the state reporting 70%. And that's just not the case. So states chose to work together so that we would have common standards. That means that in Idaho, we have, since we've had our own core standards for 12 years, we can compare how a school in Boise is doing compared to a school in Coeur d'Alene, but we couldn't, which is 400 miles away, but we couldn't compare a school in Boise with a school in Ontario that's 50 miles away because Oregon had different standards. Now Oregon has adopted the same math standards, Idaho has the same math standards. We will finally be able to compare how our schools are doing compared to other schools in other states. Right now, the only common standard we have is how much do you spend per child? Because we all use the dollar bill. And we're constantly, so that's why they're common.
And I think this question also really emphasizes the point, are these ceilings or floors?
This is the floor.
So if
right?
it's a floor, it means that we can exceed.
There's nothing stopping you. And the reason that we've all agreed that we want our standards to at least include 85% is so they can remain common. The only consequence of violating the 15% is they're no longer common with other states, and it'll be difficult then to compare how your schools are doing to other schools.
You had a question.
I have a question. Why can't we just tell the federal government to take their money, stick it,
That's right.
and learn what our founding fathers, who graduated from high school at the mere age of 13 or 11, if you want to talk about Jefferson, and go on to college. Today's standards are crap.
That's right.
We have dumbed down this nation in 230 years.
That's right. Yeah.
And it started in the last 100 under Woodrow Wilson. We need to get rid of.
So real quick.
So the question is, why can't we get rid of the federal government? And
Yeah, why'd you
so
take
we'll
their
all
money?
have to, this state will have to, people, taxpayers will have to pay a little bit more.
I would like to answer that one, actually. The reason we can't get rid of the federal government, at least conservatives like us have been successful, is because we've tried to do away with things, which leads to a void.
Have you heard of the 10th Amendment?
We've tried to do away with things that leaves
That's
the
not
void. It
answering
doesn't
my
work.
question.
You can't simply cut out Medicaid because there's too big
Have you heard of the 10th Amendment? Have you heard the annulment? We have annulment.
Okay, let me tell you something here.
Yes, go ahead.
Americans do not vote on principle. They don't care about the Constitution. They care about
What?
getting their entitlements.
Uh-huh.
That's who we're dealing with.
That's
We're
bad,
not
but
dealing with
they do.
people like
Maybe,
this.
maybe
Benjamin
40.
Franklin said it
So
the
what
best.
I'm
People
suggesting
can
we
vote their
do-
money
what
at
I'm
the end
su-
of the republic.
Excuse me, what I'm suggesting we do is we start building what we want. What I'm saying we need to do is we need to empower parents so we fill the void and crowd back what we don't want. That's what I was trying to say at the very beginning. I have some real issues in these 4 areas. We said testing, data mining, curriculum, and standards. Well, let's start creating what we want, because if we don't create it, and we got it.
And more information about what
Thank you very
Stephen
much.
is talking about is right here. And last question for the senator is right here. Hang on one second. These guys are now leaving. We got one question.
Hey,
You got
Senator and
2 minutes.
Mr. Luna, you guys have been in power for.
Excuse me, it's Jim.
Yeah, hi. It's not really a question, so relax. No, yeah, what we learned not too long ago was that indeed this concept at the state level this is just a floor. I'm in the Boise School District, and I'm telling you, I went to a couple of those board meetings, and talk about disappointment. It's amazing. So what I want to do is really focus on the Boise School District to get them to fix some serious problems that I feel they need. One example, I'll tell you this short story. During a break at the meeting, I asked Dr. Ferris, doctor some education, I guess. I asked her what the most important, or isn't parenting and parent involvement the most important factor in a kid's education? And she said, absolutely, that's the most important factor. And I said, well, what strategic programs do you manage that measure parent involvement? She had none. They emailed me a link to a parent handbook. The date, and so I went to this link, and it was written in 2006, and Bubba talked, and there were papers by these notable people that say how important parenting is. And then it comes down to implementation. Now, I was very interested in that. And it said implementation, so I clicked on that. And it comes up and says, page not found. Now, I'm telling you, I had to laugh at that or cry. Well, so I asked them, I sent an email, so what am I doing wrong? Where's the implementation? Where are the measures? Where's the bar charts, the pie charts, blah, 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 right? That measures student involvement. How many, where's the measures of teachers or evaluators that actually went out to kids' homes and evaluated their environment there, et cetera? Where are the measures? And he said, go to this other link here, and it's the full document. So I go to that link, and there was no section called implementation, period. So here's the most important factor in a kid's education in the Boise School District. Flat gets an F, in my opinion. Now, I want to see, this is a floor, which I really appreciate the concept of having a floor for a state, fine. Then, and if all the other states around the country accept this as a floor, we know how to beat every other state. This is wonderful. We go to our school board and we say we want standards that exceed any floor on any state. In fact, I want to meet or exceed the floor of any country in Asia that's beating us at the economic game, like China, etc. So I really appreciate Tom and everything.
I have a question for you. How many children do you have in the Boise School District?
I have 0.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I know we're all here talking about a very critical issue, and that's our children's education. This gentleman just told you the hours he spent investigating the most critical issue in your children, our children's education. Let me have a show of hands in here. Who has been to a Boise or their school district's meeting in the last 6 months? Let's see the hands. Oh, we got three people in here.
Good.
Well, we just got indoctrinated into government education, so.
Are they investigating before you went?
Well, I didn't have a choice, so now I'm going to be there.
All right, thank you.
So Chad, and maybe we could wrap up, because I've got about 5 minutes and I have to go, but I think Chad has touched on an important point. And you know, my wife and I homeschooled our kids for a while. And when I was the chairman of the Napa School Board, we were homeschooling a couple of our kids. You can imagine how that went over. So I'm very supportive of giving parents those choices and keeping the state and federal government completely out of the homeschooling efforts. But so much of what we've heard tonight really are decisions that are being made at the local level. The state, you know, we have to have accountability for every tax dollar that is spent. And we can't push $1.5 billion out to our schools and have no way of determining whether they're meeting the mandate to prepare our kids for the world that awaits them. So we set graduation requirements. You have to earn 43 credits, and then we tell districts exceed them, and many of them do. We set academic standards, right, which are these core standards, and they're higher, and then we tell districts exceed them, and we expect them to do that. But most of what you've talked about, whether it's the curriculum, the textbooks, the lesson plans, those decisions are going to be made by your locally elected school board. This gentleman in the back that talked about why don't we let students graduate early and move on, we passed that law 3 years ago. Go to your school board and ask them why they don't take advantage of the law that we passed that said that they can allow students to move through the system based on mastery and graduate early. The state's not prohibiting that.
Our school's doing it, 2 of our daughters.
Okay, what I'm saying is most of, and I understand why people don't go to school board meetings. I mean, I get that, but folks, that's where the most important decisions are being made.
Kim, question.
I'll close with, are you aware that you're graduating kids that think the United States is a bad country and capitalism is evil? And I talk with many students.
Sir, unfortunately, I know that's the case because it was happening when my kids were in school and they graduated.
Well, what are you going to do about it?
Well, what are you going to go to your school board and ask them?
I went to the head of the school board. It comes in to have coffee where I go, and he said, "Well, I'm a Glenn Beck fan, and he says, you got to vote for new members." And I said, "Well, I voted for you. What are you going to do about it?" He said, "Nothing."
Well, we do not choose the curriculum, but I'll tell you what I did. That's what got me involved in school was I didn't approve of the textbook that was being used because it had some of a sexual nature, and I went to the school and I kept harping, and then I ended up getting elected to the school board, and because he told me it was one night a month, and I believed him, and it changed the course of my life.
Chuck, and then that's the last one, and please get to your question, and we'll let him get out of here. If you want to take a couple minutes and talk to people, that's fine. Get to your question, please.
I and Tom Luna got together a long time ago, and I agree with everything he says. I support him completely, and he supports my project. I handed out a card. If you look at the back of it, it says we need the Bible back in the public school.
That's right.
40 states have already put the Bible back in the public school. Idaho has not. That's the only change I'm asking, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding going around because you're talking about Common Core. It would be better, because that's a real dangerous issue, it would be better if you talked about common curriculum. Common Core is directly from the pit of hell. And if you don't believe it, read this book. It's on my website, it's in the library, you can check it out for nothing.
Do you have a question?
Read this book. I am totally opposed, and the more he talks about local control, the better I like it. But we do need to get the Bible back in the public school.
Right.
One thing that I want to say, I have a great deal of experience in education. I've been around the world twice. I've taught in the public school 30 years. I worked with private schools and home schools for 30 years. But one guy in this room, who I want you to give him a hand, He fought in World War II. He's over 90 years old. He headed up the biggest school in Los Angeles. He knows more about education than anyone else in this room, bar none, because he's lived longer. He's also a very brilliant man. So, but just for defending our country, I want you to give Rob a hand. Two sentences. He and a friend of his found out what Common Core is all about. And we have right here the contract, and I'll be glad to show it to you. I won't
All right,
give
everyone,
it.
Tom Lewis, superintendent of this meeting, so I want to invite
Give me
you.
your email. And your name. I was gonna ask you the same thing, because I missed the beginning.
Okay, I have the beginning.
Yeah.
Are you guys in the Boise School District?
Meridian.
Meridian? I'm looking for Boise